why worry? Well, there's a lot of reasons to worry in our world. But I want to talk about worry today. And I'm not going to give you 3 quick, easy ways not to worry. I want to look at a different mindset, a different perspective to where maybe our anxiety can go down a little bit. So I'm going to read what Jesus' words were, and then Paul, and then we'll greet. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens, they do not sow or reap, they have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wild flowers grow, they do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Those are the words of Jesus. Now the words of the Apostle Paul. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Amen. Well, Mickey Rivers was an outfielder for the New York Yankees in the 1970s, and this was his philosophy about worry. He said it like this: "Ain't no sense worrying about things you got control over, because if you got control over them, ain't no sense worrying. And ain't no sense worrying about things you've got no control over, because if you got no control over them, ain't no sense worrying." You are dismissed. Jesus says, don't worry. Then Paul ups it, says, don't worry about anything. But here's the problem with worry. If I tell you right now, do not think about guacamole and chips, what are you thinking about? If I tortillas, if I tell you don't think about your favorite dessert, what are you thinking about? So when Jesus and Paul tell us don't worry, what do we think about? Our worries. I did an informal survey. I've wanted to preach this message over the last couple of months, but I had to figure out how to do it not in a cliche way, because there are a lot of worries out there. I did an informal survey over the last few weeks asking people what they're worried about, and it's the same as it's been forever. Money worries, worries about war, worries about their kids or grandkids. 2 people just this last week are worried if they're going to have a job by the end of the year. Medical issues. One guy's worried about how the tariffs are going to affect his stock values. Guy sitting next to him overheard that and said, "I'm worried because I don't understand what a tariff is." People are worried about global warming, our oceans, worried about fires, political divisions, worried if they will be single the rest of their life. One person said they drive on Sunrise Boulevard a lot, and they're worried about the angry drivers that try to throw them off the road. Some of you, your worries aren't quite as deep. You're worried that you won't be able to fit into your summer shorts. One guy said, "I'm worried my hair is thinning and my hips are thickening." Okay, I'll move on. If you're worried about any of those things, or if you have another worry in your life, raise your hand right now. All right. How many of you are worried that people are going to judge you for raising your hand? See, when it comes to worry, we all have them. But just saying I'm not going to worry doesn't work. Worrying less, lowering our anxiety, is a byproduct of a certain mindset. It's a different way of thinking. And that's what I want to talk about today, okay? So this isn't going to be a classic worry message. I'm not going to give you 3 easy steps to not worry. I want to talk about living with a different mindset that will, by its nature, have anxiety kind of lower in our lives. Here's my thesis. I'll put it on the screen. Our perspective, our mindset in life determines our level of anxiety. Or, as the writer of Proverbs says, as a man thinks, so he is. Our perspective, our mindset in life determines our level of anxiety. And the truth is, some people, God has made some people who don't really have a big worrying problem. They're called chill people. You know them? But even chill people worry. Just not as much as those of you who have received your master's or PhD degree in worrying. Anybody have those degrees? For some of you, it is your hobby to worry. You are the one that when you wake up and you have nothing to worry about, that makes you worry. This is what we tend to think. We tend to think, or at least I'll speak for myself, if I just get everything in order, if I just have control of my environment, if I can secure my household, if I can fill my bank account, then my worries will go away. Do not worry, the Bible says. Worry, the word itself, comes from an old English word that means to strangle, to choke, or to seize by the throat. That's what worry does. The Greek definition is worry is a divided mind. So Jesus says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Worry divides our minds, half of it trying to be in the moment, celebrating the gift of life, celebrating grandchildren's and birthdays, and celebrating nature and the rising or the setting sun. Half of our mind is in the moment, which we're supposed to live in, but the other half is obsessed with the future, a future that we can't control, a future of what ifs. What if I can't pay my bills? What if my kid doesn't turn the corner? What if the stock market keeps going down? What if the medical tests come back with bad news? What if, what if, what if? And what if strangles our joy and divides our minds. When you live with those two words, what if, it prevents you from living in the precious, spectacular, miraculous moment of now. And now is all we have. Charlie Brown said to Linus, I worry about school a lot. And then he thought a little longer and says, I worry about worrying so much about school. And then he reflects and concludes, even my anxieties have anxieties. So Jesus says, who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Some people here, you think when Paul says, people think, well, when Paul says don't worry about anything, it means, well, just walk through life in a carefree, cavalier spirit like Mr. Magoo, oblivious, don't worry about anything, don't be concerned about anything, don't take responsibility, just be groovy, loose, and free. That's what don't worry does not mean. That's not what this means. The bottom line is that we are to be concerned about things. Concerned about our family, our faith, our world, our nation, our health. We should be concerned because our concern will motivate us into action. Here is the difference between worry and concern. Worry strangles and divides. Concern leads to action. So let me read the thesis again and we'll get into this. Our perspective, our mindset in life determines our level of anxiety. As a man thinks, so he is. So let's turn a corner here and just focus on mindset for a while. Author Lisa TerKeurst notes that very often we have a mindset that leads to anxiety. A mindset we get stuck, but where in which we get stuck by a two-word phrase. Here's the two-word phrase: but I. But I. But I. But I don't think I can do it. But I don't think it's in me. I ought to work out and get in shape. I know I should. But I'm tired. I would like to live a life free of worry and anxiety, but I need to have more things in order. But I know I ought to eat kale and quinoa and tofu, but I love sugar and butter and bacon and barbecues. But I wonder, will God really take care of me like the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, like he said in Luke 12? That little phrase, but I, is very human, and it actually comes up in the Bible over and over again. God says to Moses, I want you to go and confront Pharaoh, and Moses says, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. God comes to Gideon. Gideon, I want you to deliver my people from the Midianites, and Gideon says, but I am least of the family. God says to Jeremiah, it comes to Jeremiah and wants him to bring his word to the people. And Jeremiah says, but I cannot speak for you, for I'm too young. God asks Esther to go and deliver the people from this homicidal maniac. And she says, but I have not been called by the king for 30 days. God wants Abraham to become the father of a great nation, but I am too old. Jesus wants Peter to cast his nets on the other side, but I have tried all night. Over and over again, we see these words in the Bible, and we see them in our own lives. I want to make my marriage better, but I don't think I can. I'd like to overcome a destructive habit, but I don't think I can. I want to stop being filled with worry and anxiety, but I don't think I can. Now, what's interesting when we see this statement in the Bible is God never disagrees with these people, with these but I statements. God doesn't say, hey, Moses, actually, you're a pretty good speaker, and Jeremiah, you're not too young, and Abraham, you're not too old. No, he doesn't say that. Now, Paul talks about this. In Paul's letter to the church of Corinth, which I know the men have been studying on Wednesdays, show the map of Corinth, because the map of Corinth, that kingdom was a lot like what we talked about last week, where you have a few powerful people up here and then a lot of people without any power. In Paul's letter to the church of Corinth, in the ancient world, it was a very competitive culture. It was what the kingdom of the world looked like and still looks like. It was a Roman colony. It was the center for a lot of trade and commerce, economically flourishing. Corinth was called the original sin city. They had a saying in Corinth, only the tough survive, and it looked like this. A few powerful and everyone else kind of just serving the powerful. In this great city, there's this little band of ragtag followers of Jesus following the way of the cross, and a lot of them were slaves. Most of them would have ranked pretty low. And there was an ancient advice that said to speakers or writers who were trying to gain credibility with their audience, one way to do it was to throw praise at them. To tell them how intelligent they are, how qualified they are. That's what good communicators do. They win their audience over. So imagine how the Corinthians felt in that little church when they read Paul's description of them at the beginning of his letter. Not many of you are very wise. By human standards, not many were influential, and not many of you are of noble birth. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. He doesn't start out, hey, Corinth, you've got IQ, you got EQ, you got connections, you got resources. Hey, Church of Corinth, I want to write you an encouraging letter. So how should I describe you? Wise? No. Influential? No. Great gene pool? Not so much. It's funny, he's remarkably untroubled by this implication of the people he's writing to. And you know what else he doesn't say once he says that's who they are? He doesn't say, therefore, church, lower your expectations. Don't get your hopes up because you don't have much. No, he says this, expect great things. Expect great things. Not because they have great things to offer God, but because God is up to something in this world that nobody in this world could have expected. God is building a new kingdom that does not look like this kingdom anymore. So he says this. He says, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. But God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. But God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things, the things that are not, to nullify the things that are. But God chose. You notice the difference? Now in the Bible, those two little words, but God, are a huge significance. It's a huge mindset. From but I to but God. Injustice, oppression, getting trapped in our own inadequacies, there are worries all around. It's a but I world. But now it has been interrupted through Jesus. God's kingdom has become available for ordinary people like you and I to live. So don't worry. Seek first God's kingdom because it's a but God kingdom. And these are the two words, when you see them in the Bible, you want to note them. Because the big shift has come, a great reversal, a great new mindset. They're the two words that are a turning point for a human life, but God. To move from but I to but God. So let me just encourage you today. Whatever you're facing, whatever your worries, whether you're watching or you're here, There's a lot to worry about. This is not a denial of that in our world. But God. But God. We live in a kingdom of but God. However inadequate you may feel, unqualified, but God. But God. What God was doing in Corinth and what Jesus did on the cross, he overturned expectations, elevating the lowly, changing death into life, where our weaknesses will be made strong. So if you carry nothing else from this message, I want us all to carry away these two words, but God. So let's say them all together. Ready? But God. Say it even louder. But God. But God means this world does not have the last word. Joseph says to his brothers who sold him into slavery, you intended it to harm, but God intended it for good. The psalmist, my flesh and my heart may fail. Well, that's true. But God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Jesus, with humans, it's impossible. Salvation, goodness, ultimate justice, it's a pipe dream with human power alone. But with God, all things are possible. That is the kingdom we live in. When I'm living with but I, the things of this world, the worries of this world will strangle my soul. My mind will be divided, half in his kingdom and half in mine, because but I, it's up to me. But when I live in the mindset of but God, worry begins to wane. In this life, you and I must decide. Here it is, I'll put it up. This is what we have to decide. Simple message, that's me. But I or but God? I just don't know how else to say it, so I'll say it. God is bigger than your butt. One T. One T. One T. I say that so it's recorded. One T. But I can't control the future. But I can't control my kid. But I'm not strong enough, wise enough, powerful enough. But I can't not worry. But God has chosen the foolish and the weak and the lowly and the meek and the timid and the poor and the too loud and the not very polished and the troubled and the addicted and the failed and whatever else is going on in your heart and in your family or with your money or with your health. I know there is a lot to worry about. But God, I tell you, but God, sin, death, pain, even though they're real, they are not final, friends, because the power of the cross and the power of the resurrection, which we are heading to in the next few weeks. Vince, you can say amen to that. You see, much like our world, Corinth, they lived where the scramble for honor and for rank and for power. This was a but-I kingdom. It was the predominant human activity, as Jesus said in Luke 12, we read it. The pagans run after these things. And when we do, it creates a lot of anxiety and worry. And so he says, seek another kingdom. Seek his kingdom, his righteousness. It's a different kingdom. It's a kingdom of but God. And Doug showed me this last week. He says, you know what's great about this kingdom? The cross fits really nice. The cross comes in and changes everything. And the ground is level at the foot of the cross. And now everybody has access to but God. So do not worry, friends. Do not worry. Not because there will not be pain in the future, because there will be. So do not worry, friends. Not because there will not be difficulties, because there will be. Do not worry, because in this world, Jesus said, you will have trouble, but cheer up, but God, because I have overcome the world. Morning may last through the night, but with God, joy comes in the morning. I am weak, but God is strong. Okay, let me take one more swipe at this, okay? One more swipe. To the church at Corinth, Paul writes that there were other wannabe leaders of the church. They were kind of self-proclaimed apostles. They were kind of like the TV evangelists of our world. And these super apostles were trying to lure the little church in Corinth away from the message of the cross and back to a but-I kingdom. They were trying to send a message that operates how our world generally does. It's all going to go to the strong and the powerful. And so they compared their ministries to Paul's, to put Paul down. And they said, we have greater visions. We have greater miracles. Back in those days, these super apostles were called sophists. And they were like motivational speakers of our day. And they knew how to make a lot of money. They were like rock stars. And people from the little church of the cross thought, well, Paul, you need to stand up for yourself. So Paul is writing to win them back to Jesus. He's writing them back to the cross, from but I to but God. So everybody expects Paul, list your best credentials. You know, how many souls have you saved, Paul? How many churches have you planted? How many letters have you written that are going to end up in the New Testament? But Paul does not do that. How does he talk about himself? He says, here's my qualifications. I've been imprisoned more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. And then you just got to read the rest. He just lists all his failures. Who does that? We tend to lead when we're trying out for a job, or we lead with our best credentials, not our worst. Even when you're trying out for a job and they say, well, tell us what your weaknesses are. We even lie about that. Well, my weakness is I just work too hard, you know. I think I just get along with people too much, you know. You will never look better than you do on your resume, someone said. Paul has a strange resume. Here's Paul's resume. Here it is. In order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Apparently, Paul has an ego problem. His ego is bad enough that he's given some painful and shameful condition that also involves suffering by a messenger from Satan. He calls it a thorn in the flesh. People would say that his letters were really impressive, but when he comes to speak, they go, not so much. Not so much. The book of Acts records him preaching one time, and the message is so boring and long that a teenager falls out of the window and dies. Not a great resume, you know. When I preach, people die. If that's not, Paul raised him from the dead. Everything's okay, all right? If that's not bad enough, Paul asked God to take this thorn away, and his prayers for thorn removal are a failure. So Paul's a failure at prayer multiple times. These other super apostles are strong, successful, charismatic, eloquent, wealthy poster boys for a God living their best lives right now. And Paul is a train wreck, a beaten, whipped, conceit-prone, thorn-carrying, prayer-failing, self-confessed weakling. And he leads with all that. Those are my credentials. Who would do that? Now, Paul is not using false humility. He is announcing a new mindset. He is realizing that, but I, God's power, but God is far greater than but I, his power. He's realizing that God's power is far more powerful than his own power, and that God is bigger than his buts. Our world, even in the church world, too often we're living still with but I, and not with the mindset of but God. This weekend on the Sabbath here, over about 2.5 billion people will go to church around the world. And I'm asking the question, are churches preaching but God or but I? Paul said, don't worry about anything, but pray, be thankful, because those are kingdom things. Why? He says, pray and be thankful, don't worry about anything. It wasn't because he didn't have any problems or that he had it under control or that he had it all figured out. No, he said, don't worry. Because his mindset, his life was a life of not but I, but a life of but God. And the fruit of that is anxiety begins to wane. You'll still have it, but you'll worry less because you live in a different kingdom. But God, Paul said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. Let me just put my own words up there, paraphrasing that. Because the best of human power ain't much, but the least of Christ's power, oh my goodness. And Paul goes on preaching for the rest of his life. And the message is the message of the cross. Everyone welcome. Red and yellow, black and white. Everybody, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. He preaches the cross, a message that is foolish to this kingdom we live in. He says the message of the cross seems foolish to those who are lost and dying, but it is God's power to us who are being saved. So the thesis today, our perspective, our mindset in life determines our level of anxiety. And we all live Paul lives. We've all got thorns in the flesh. We all have those failures. There's plenty to worry about. The question is whether we will live with the mindset of but I or but God. Have I beat this into the ground enough today? Willie Davis played for the Dodgers, was all-pro, all-star. In 1966, Willie Davis played in the World Series. He's center fielder, and he made 3 errors in 1 inning and lost the game for his team. Still a record today, 3 errors in 1 inning. They're in the locker room. They're interviewing him. Willie, are you worried about your legacy? And he looked at the camera and he says, well, it ain't my wife and it ain't my life, so why worry about it? That's called perspective. How frustrating for Paul's enemies, Satan and all his earthly enemies, who try everything to discourage Paul through trials and tribulations and insults. And he says, nothing in all creation can separate me from God's love. Paraphrase, it ain't my wife and it ain't my life, so why worry about it? Okay, let me close with this. Then we'll do communion. But don't start with communion yet, okay? I'll tell you what. There's a writer and a priest by the name of Henry Nouwen. And I've talked about him a lot around here because he has helped shape my life. He has touched many, many people, and he walked away from a life of affluence. He had a prestigious life at Harvard University to work, and he left to work with handicapped adults. Henry talked about moving from trying to be relevant to a life of quiet servitude. He says, I've tried to move from but I to but God. And he helped people with deep wounds because he was someone with deep wounds and who knew how to meet Jesus in his own inadequacy. At the end of his life, he became fascinated with these trapeze artists known as the Flying Rodleys. He said what they did was a parable for life with God. He writes, they let him come and watch practice one day. And he says, one day I was sitting with Rodley, the leader of the troop, talking about flying. And Rodley was the flyer. He said, as the flyer, I must have complete trust in my catcher. The public might think that I'm the great star of the trapeze because I'm the one that's flying through the air, but the real star is the catcher. He has to be there for me with split-second precision and grab me out of the air. The secret, Rodley said, that as the flyer, I am to do nothing, the catcher does everything. When I'm flying through the air, I have to simply stretch my arms and hands out and wait for him to catch me. Rodley said, the worst thing the flyer can do is try to catch the catcher. If I flail and grab and reach, it's hard for him to catch. The flyer must trust with outstretched arms that his catcher will be there for him. The flyer must fly and the catcher must catch. As Isaiah said, for I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says, do not fear, I will help you. Flyer must fly, we're the flyers. The catcher must catch, that is God. And friends, I don't have to tell you, but in this kingdom, there's a lot of flailing and grabbing, which leads to a lot of anxiety. But there is another kingdom. There is another kingdom. And God is on the move, but not like people think he is. But God chose the lowly. But God chose the weak. But God chose the nobodies. And we know this because God chose a baby born in a nowhere town to an unknown family, despised and rejected and beaten as an adult, falsely accused. Jesus was put to death on a cross, and the powerful and the rich and the ones in charge seemed to squelch the movement of this man who taught about another kingdom of love and equality and forgiveness. But God, say it with me, but God raised him from the dead because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him, and because of that, death can't keep its hold on you and I either. So we must choose our kingdom, but I, or God's kingdom, but God. So do not be afraid, friends, nor dismayed, for the battle is not yours, but God's. But God showed his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. But God, being rich in mercy, made us alive together with Christ. By grace, you have been saved. So, ain't no sense worrying about things you can't control over. Because if you got control over them, ain't no sense worrying. And ain't no sense worrying about things you got no control over because you got no control over them. Ain't no sense worrying. So when it comes to worry, anxiety, and all the things that are out there that are real, let's just remember that God is bigger than our butts. I'm sorry, I had to say it one more time. 1T. 1T.